Welcome back to Billionaire Success Lessons. Today, I want to tell you the story of a man who changed cinema not because the road was easy, but because he refused to let fear, failure, and rejection decide the ending of his life. George Lucas did not begin as a confident Hollywood king. He began as a young man from Modesto, California, born on May 14, 1944, who once dreamed of becoming a race car driver before life pushed him in a completely different direction. He would go on to create Star Wars, help launch Indiana Jones, found Lucasfilm in 1971, build Industrial Light and Magic in 1975, and later sell Lucasfilm to Disney in 2012. But none of that was guaranteed in the beginning. His story is really about vision, resilience, independence, and the courage to keep building when the world cannot yet see what you see. Before George Lucas ever changed the movie business, he was a teenager who loved cars, speed, and the idea of becoming a professional racer. That dream ended when a fatal car accident just before high school. Graduation changed the course of his life. The crash forced him to slow down, recover, and rethink everything. Instead of chasing the racetrack, he enrolled at Modesto Junior College. And that detour became one of the most important turns in his life. Sometimes success begins when one dream dies and another one, still invisible, quietly begins to grow. Lucas did not know it then, but the accident that seemed like the end of one future was opening the door to a bigger one. At Modesto Junior College and later at the University of Southern California, George Lucas found something that would define him far more deeply than racing ever could. Storytelling through images. He transferred to USC Film School, where he developed a strong interest in visual storytelling, editing, and experimental filmmaking. He made student films, including Electronic Labyrinth, THX 1138 for E, which drew serious attention and helped establish him as a young creative force. What matters here is not just that he was talented. What matters is that he was becoming disciplined. He was learning how to think like a filmmaker, how to shape mood and movement, and how to trust imagination even when it did not fit traditional expectations. That is one of the first big lessons in George Lucas's life. A setback can break you, or it can redirect you. A dream collapsing can leave you bitter, or it can leave you open. Lucas did not get the future he first imagined, but he stayed curious enough to discover a better one. That is a powerful truth for anyone listening right now. Sometimes the thing you lose is not your destiny. Sometimes it is only the road that was too small for the life you were really meant to build. After USC, Lucas moved into the world of professional filmmaking and early on he was drawn to independence. He did not want to become another studio employee following formula. He did not believe in. He wanted freedom. He wanted control. He wanted to experiment. His first major feature, THX 1138, grew out of his student work and was released in 1971. Critically, it drew attention, but commercially, it failed. That is an important moment in his journey because many people assume great creators rise in a straight line. They do not. Lucas's first major feature did not make him a conquering hero. It left him facing one of the hardest questions any artist faces. Do you keep going when the world does not reward your first serious effort? He did. And that decision led to the film that changed everything for him. Before Star Wars ever existed. In 1973, he wrote and directed American Graffiti. Inspired by his youth in Modesto and the car culture he had once loved. The film was a surprise smash hit. It earned major acclaim, Academy Award nominations, and gave Lucas something more valuable than early praise, leverage. It gave him proof that he could connect with a large audience without losing his own voice. It gave him the credibility to aim even higher. This is another powerful lesson in his story. Sometimes one failure teaches you how to make the breakthrough that follows. Sometimes the work that does not win teaches you how to create. The work that changes your life. But George Lucas was never someone who wanted to stay where success felt safe. After American Graffiti, he turned toward a much bigger dream. A space fantasy that would eventually become Star Wars. This was not the obvious next move. It was risky, expensive, and hard to explain. He was trying to combine myth, adventure serials, science fiction, and emotional storytelling into something Hollywood had not really seen in that form before. He founded Lucasfilm to support his projects. And as Star Wars moved toward production, he also founded Industrial Light and Magic in 1975 because the visual effects needed for his story largely did not exist at the level he wanted. That is an extraordinary detail, when the tools he needed were missing. He did not lower the dream. He helped build the tools. Think about what that means. Most people shrink the vision to match the available resources. George Lucas did the opposite. He expanded the resources to match the vision. That is the mindset of a builder. It is the mindset of someone who refuses to let current limitations define future possibilities. He was not just making a movie. He was changing the machinery of filmmaking itself. When Star Wars arrived in 1977, it did more than succeed. It became the highest grossing film at the time, and the Academy recognized it with multiple Oscar wins. But the real significance goes even deeper. Star Wars changed the cultural imagination. It changed what a blockbuster could be. It changed the role of special effects. It changed the relationship between movies, myth, and merchandise. And through Industrial Light and Magic, and later other Lucas companies, George Lucas helped create an ecosystem that would influence not only his own work, but the future of the entire film industry. Success on that scale can easily destroy a person. It can trap them inside their own legend. But George Lucas's story did not stop with one giant hit. He kept building. He stayed deeply involved as writer, producer, and creative force behind the empire. Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. He also helped create the Indiana Jones franchise with Steven Spielberg. In other words, he did not become great because of one lucky moment. He became great because he turned one creative victory into a long-term foundation for more worlds, more characters, more technology, and more cultural impact. That is what separates a hit from a legacy. There is another reason George Lucas's journey matters so much. Even while he became one of the most important figures in modern entertainment, he spent much of his life fighting to remain independent. He was never simply chasing Hollywood approval. He cared deeply about control, ownership, and the freedom to make decisions without being trapped by the usual studio system. That independence was part of his strength. It allowed him to think differently, to invest in technology, and to create companies that served imagination instead of just short-term trends. In a world where many artists trade freedom for acceptance, George Lucas kept betting on the long game. That long game included building companies, not just films. Lucasfilm became far more than a production company. Industrial Light and Magic transformed visual effects. Skywalker sound became part of the gold standard for movie sound. Lucas's work did not only entertain audiences, it changed the infrastructure behind modern filmmaking. This is important because some people make art while others build platform that allow art itself to evolve. George Lucas did both. He created beloved stories, and he helped reshape the technical future of the medium that carried those stories. Still, even a life this successful was not free from pain, criticism, and difficult transitions. Great creators are often misunderstood, especially when they return to beloved work after years away. Lucas experienced that. He also knew what it meant to carry the burden of public expectation on a scale most people could never imagine. Once the world decides you are a legend, it no longer responds to you as a normal human being. It responds to the symbol. That can be isolating. It can be exhausting. And yet he kept creating, kept experimenting, and kept living with the complicated reality of being one of the most influential storytellers of his era. One of the most significant later turning points in his journey came in 2012, when Disney acquired Lucasfilm for about $4.05 billion. That deal included Lucasfilm's major businesses, including Industrial Light and Magic and Skywalker Sound. To some people it looked like the end of an era. But another way to see it is this. George Lucas had built something so large, so durable, and so culturally powerful that it could move into the hands of one of the world's biggest entertainment companies, and still remain central to global storytelling. That is not surrender. That is scale. That is the measure of what he built. And even after that, his story did not become a story of disappearance. George Lucas has continued to focus on larger ideas about art, education, and legacy. He founded the George Lucas Educational Foundation in 1991 to support innovation in schools. He and Melody Hobson also founded the Lucas Museum of Narrative Art, a museum built around the power of illustrated stories and narrative art. That matters because it shows that his imagination was never limited to box office success. He cared about learning. He cared about how people understand stories. He cared about what culture can pass on to future generations. There is something deeply inspiring in that. George Lucas did not just ask, "How do I make another hit?" He asked bigger questions. How do stories shape people? How do images shape belief? How do we preserve imagination? That is the kind of thinking that turns success into legacy. Money matters. Fame matters. But what lasts longest is often the institution. The idea or the inspiration that keeps it working after the spotlight moves on. So what can we learn from George Lucas's journey? We can learn that a setback can become a redirection. We can learn that failure at the beginning does not disqualify greatness later. We can learn that if the tools do not exist for your dream, you may have to help build them. We can learn that independence matters, that ownership matters, and that long-term thinking can be more powerful than short-term applause. We can learn that the world may not understand your vision while it is still forming. But that does not make the vision less real. And we can learn that storytelling itself can become a form of world building so powerful that it changes generations. If you are listening right now during a season when your dream feels strange, too ambitious, or too difficult to explain, George Lucas's life should encourage you. Remember this: the man who gave the world Star Wars almost lost his first dream in a car crash. He made a first major feature that failed commercially. He had to fight for freedom, build new tools, and trust imagination before the world gave him permission. His life is proof that greatness often looks uncertain while it is still being built. And maybe that is the deepest reason. His journey belongs here on Billionaire Success Lessons. Because George Lucas reminds us that the people who change the world are not always the people who fit neatly into it. Sometimes they are the people who see farther, build longer, and stay faithful to a vision that sounds impossible until the day it becomes unforgettable. His story is not just about movies. It is about resilience, reinvention, creative courage, and the power of believing in it. world no one else can see yet.